Camilla Parker Bowles has remained one of the most controversial figures connected to the British royal family for years, but few could have imagined the level of alleged plotting that unfolded the instant King Charles lost consciousness. And I want to break down the entire story because there are several layers here that many people overlooked when the footage first began making the rounds online. Let's begin inside Buckingham Palace, specifically within the restricted medical wing. King Charles is lying in a hospital bed, connected to multiple monitors, drifting in and out of consciousness. The room is quiet, dimly lit, and carries that cold, clinical atmosphere. Standing at the end of the bed is Camilla, dressed entirely in black velvet. She's not speaking. She's not shedding tears. She's simply staring. But it wasn't the look of a devoted wife watching over someone she loves. It felt more like someone staring at a countdown, waiting for the exact moment to act. That particular detail stayed with me when I first heard about it, because it reveals a lot about the state of mind she was allegedly in. The moment Charles slipped unconscious, Camilla reportedly set a long-prepared plan into motion. There was no hesitation, no wasted time. That very night, during the palace's midnight guard rotation, when security personnel were changing shifts, Camilla and her son Tom allegedly entered the central security station. A drawer had supposedly been left slightly ajar by a guard who had already been paid off. Inside sat the master key ring, a heavy bronze collection of keys granting access to the Royal Heritage Vault. Camilla took the ring, passed it to Tom, and the pair headed directly toward the basement. This is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. The Heritage Vault isn't an ordinary storage room. It's the location where some of the most historically important treasures connected to the monarchy are kept. At the center of the room rested the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, one of the most recognizable pieces ever associated with the late Queen Elizabeth. Covered in diamonds, crafted with extraordinary detail, and carrying immense symbolic significance, it was one of the crown jewels of royal history. According to the claims, Camilla walked directly to the display, lifted the tiara with her bare hands, and dropped it into a black leather bag that Tom held open. No protective gloves, no ceremonial handling. She simply took it and walked away. The tiara was then reportedly brought to her private study at Clarence House. There, she moved aside a large oil painting hanging on the wall, revealed a personal safe hidden within the stonework, and locked the piece away. As far as she was concerned, the tiara now belonged to her. And when you look at the symbolism behind it, the tiara represented much more than a valuable piece of jewelry. It was widely believed that Catherine would wear it at major royal appearances in the future. Taking it wasn't merely theft, it was a statement, a deliberate attempt to weaken the image of the future queen before she had the opportunity to fully embrace her position. But that was only the beginning. The following morning, Camilla reportedly met a man named Colin in a secluded garden hidden behind the palace grounds. Colin was said to be an operative with access to media distribution servers. During the meeting, she handed him a matte black USB drive containing what she described as edited recordings and fabricated documents aimed directly at the Middleton family. What makes the allegation especially disturbing is how specific the instructions allegedly were. She reportedly ordered him to connect the drive to the central media server at precisely midnight, so the damaging material would appear across the front pages of major British tabloids at the exact same moment. The goal was clear: publicly embarrass Catherine's family, frame the issue around social class, and allow the press to carry out the attack on her behalf. Yet even that wasn't the end of the operation. While Camilla focused on the media campaign, her granddaughter Lola was allegedly assigned a completely different task. She was sent to the Wales family's private residence disguised as a cleaning staff member. Taking advantage of a routine shift change, she slipped into a restricted hallway and eventually reached the children's bedroom. Her mission was to install a hidden camera and microphone beneath the iron frame of one of the beds. At that point, the situation had moved far beyond politics, status, or money. It had become an act of surveillance involving children, and the fact that it was reportedly connected to the same broader operation only highlights how carefully everything had been planned. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Lola allegedly underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. Princess Charlotte, only 10 years old at the time, walked out of the bathroom and immediately sensed that something wasn't right. She noticed Lola rising from beside the bed and behaving suspiciously. Charlotte directly asked what she was doing and wasn't satisfied when Lola awkwardly claimed she had been looking for a dropped button. Charlotte didn't panic. She didn't shout. Instead, she quietly studied her, watched her leave the room, then walked over to the bed and inspected the area underneath. Moments later, she headed straight to her mother's study and carefully explained everything she had witnessed. That detail is more important than many people realize, because Charlotte's attention to detail was what set the next chain of events into motion. Catherine chose not to contact the police. She didn't release a statement or alert the media. Instead, she quietly secured the children's bedroom and kept the entire matter confidential. Later that night, she and William changed into dark clothing and began investigating on their own. Using a handheld radio frequency detector, one of the specialized devices quietly maintained by royal security, they carefully scanned the room. When William moved the detector beneath the bed frame, the indicator instantly flashed red. He reached underneath and pulled out the hidden microcamera. Catherine studied the device for a few seconds before making a decision on the spot. She told William that Camilla could never know they had discovered it. Rather than simply shutting the operation down, they would trace it back to its source and turn the situation against the people behind it. From the darkness of the corridor, Edward emerged. William had secretly entrusted him with overseeing an internal intelligence inquiry, and in his hand was an electromagnetic jamming device. Together, the three of them moved quietly through the palace, avoiding surveillance systems as they made their way toward the central server room. At that point, this wasn't just damage control anymore. It had evolved into a carefully planned counteroffensive, and Catherine was the one directing it. The server room was freezing, the kind of cold that immediately settles over you the moment the door opens. Towering rows of servers stretched along the walls, their green indicator lights blinking rhythmically through the dim surroundings. Using a high-security encrypted access card, Edward bypassed the biometric lock. The instant they stepped inside, William's attention locked onto master drive number 3. The matte black USB drive was still inserted deep into the system, its red indicator flashing steadily. Beside it, an upload progress bar crawled across a nearby monitor. 98%. 99%. William didn't waste a second. He crossed the room in a handful of strides, grabbed the USB drive, and ripped it from the port. The blinking red light disappeared instantly. A long error tone echoed through the room as the upload process failed. Then, without hesitation, he snapped the device in half. The plastic shell cracked apart. The circuit board broke cleanly down the middle. He dropped the remains onto the floor and crushed them beneath his shoe. Just like that, Camilla's media operation was finished. No legal battles, no official statements, no paperwork. Just William standing in a server room after midnight, making certain those files would never reach a newspaper headline. While he handled the drive, Edward connected a data extraction unit to the operative's workstation. Within minutes, he pulled the entire transaction history. Names, payment records, bribe amounts, instruction timelines, every connection tied to the network Camilla had allegedly built inside the palace. The complete map of the operation. Using a nearby security printer, Edward produced a physical copy and handed it directly to Catherine. She reviewed the pages carefully. The investigation was over. Every element of the conspiracy had now been documented and placed into the hands of the very people it was intended to undermine. Meanwhile, completely unaware of what had happened, Camilla continued operating as though her plan was proceeding perfectly. The following morning, she climbed into an armored vehicle carrying 2 empty suitcases and headed toward the headquarters of 3 major arts patronage organizations. At each location, she reportedly entered the director's office, dropped empty envelopes onto the desk, and demanded control of every funding check scheduled for distribution. Her bodyguards pushed accountants aside, opened secured safes, and loaded stacks of checks into the leather cases. Camilla informed the directors that all sponsorship funding would now be administered directly through Clarence House. And because many of the people involved feared challenging her authority, they complied. Her objective wasn't simply financial gain. It was strategic. A large part of Catherine's public reputation had been built around supporting arts programs and cultural initiatives. By taking control of those funds, Camilla could embarrass her publicly, deprive organizations of promised support, and create the impression that Catherine lacked the authority needed to honor royal commitments. The entire move was designed to make her appear powerless at the exact moment she needed to project strength. What Camilla failed to understand was the true source of Catherine's influence. For years, she had assumed Catherine's position was weakened by her family's middle-class roots. The Middletons lacked aristocratic titles, inherited estates, and generations of old wealth. But William was the lawful heir to the Duchy of Cornwall and the Highgrove estate. Those holdings generated enormous independent revenue, resources completely outside Clarence House's reach and beyond anyone Camilla could pressure or manipulate. That same afternoon, Catherine assembled a convoy bearing the royal insignia and headed directly to the arts organizations. There were no appointments, no press announcements, no advance warning. The conference room doors swung open, and Catherine walked inside. Behind her came Edward along with 4 security officers carrying heavy oak chests reinforced with copper fittings. One by one, the chests were placed onto the polished walnut conference table. The lids opened. Inside sat solid gold bars stamped with the royal seal of the Highgrove estate, alongside large bundles of cash drawn from the personal legal assets of the new king and queen. Not paperwork, not future promises. Actual gold resting on the table in front of everyone. The directors who had spent the previous day being pressured into surrendering their funding checks suddenly found themselves witnessing something entirely different. Catherine addressed them directly, her tone calm but firm. She told them that the royal family does not abandon cultural heritage, and it does not allow looting to disguise itself as patronage. Every word carried weight. Without hesitation, the directors opened their private safes and removed the authorization documents they had signed under pressure for Clarence House. One after another, the papers disappeared into the shredder. Then they reached for their phones. Calls were placed to the national banking system. Payment authorities were revoked. Every check that had been transferred to Clarence House the previous day was frozen and canceled immediately. With a single phone call, every document Camilla had spent the previous day collecting instantly lost its value. The suitcases packed with checks sitting beneath her desk at Clarence House had become nothing more than stacks of useless paper. The financial system she intended to use to reward loyal operatives and maintain control over her network had been severed completely. She didn't realize it yet, but the foundation supporting her entire operation had already been pulled out from beneath her. The evening before the state banquet, Camilla sat alone in her private study at Clarence House preparing herself. She was attempting to stay composed, mentally reviewing her plans one final time. Eventually, she walked over to the large oil painting mounted on the wall and slid it aside. Behind it sat the safe. She entered the combination. The dial turned smoothly. The lock released with a click, and the heavy steel door slowly opened. Camilla reached inside for the tiara. Instead, her fingers touched a pile of rough plastic fragments. Confused, she pulled out the velvet case and opened the lid. Inside were broken pieces of cheap plastic, intentionally shattered and carefully arranged where the tiara should have been. Mixed among the fragments were palace access cards belonging to members of her media operation. Every single card had been sliced neatly in half. For a moment, Camilla simply stared. She struggled to understand what she was seeing. Only she knew the safe's combination. The security measures had been designed specifically to prevent unauthorized access. There should have been no possible way for Catherine to enter without leaving evidence behind. And yet, the proof sat directly in front of her. The missing tiara was only part of the message. The real message was that Catherine had known. She had known long enough to organize a response that was this precise, this calculated, and this publicly humiliating. Those plastic fragments weren't merely replacing the tiara. They were communicating something much bigger. Everything you believed belonged to you had already been reclaimed. The state banquet was exactly the sort of occasion the royal family uses to demonstrate unity, stability, and power to the world. Hundreds of invited guests filled the halls, heads of state, members of nobility, diplomats, and journalists from major international outlets all gathered under one roof. Buckingham Palace's Grand Hall glowed beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. A full orchestra played throughout the room while champagne glasses clinked and conversations echoed beneath the music. The image was flawless. Camilla arrived alongside members of the Parker Bowles family, doing her best to appear composed, but anyone paying close attention could see the difference. The confidence she normally carried had faded. The smile remained, but it felt forced. She and her relatives gradually moved toward the edge of the hall, settling into a corner. That alone revealed everything. They were no longer controlling the room, they were trying to disappear inside it. Then the great oak doors opened. There was no formal introduction, no grand announcement, only a brief rush of cool air before Catherine stepped through the entrance. The atmosphere changed immediately, not because of theatrics, not because of spectacle, but because of the way she carried herself. The calm, measured image people had associated with her for years seemed transformed into something stronger, sharper, and completely unshakable. She wasn't pretending to be confident. She simply was, and everyone present could sense it. Resting on her head and catching every beam of light in the hall was the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. The very same tiara Camilla had hidden inside her personal safe just 2 days earlier. The diamonds scattered reflections across the walls and ceilings. Guests closest to the entrance visibly reacted as recognition spread through the crowd like a wave. William entered directly behind Catherine, half a step back, silent. The positioning mattered. He wasn't leading the moment. He was reinforcing it. His silence amplified her authority more than any speech could have. Across the room, Camilla saw the tiara, and whatever remained of her composure began to unravel. She stared at the diamonds on Catherine's head, then looked down at her own hands as the reality settled in. She had stolen it. She had hidden it. She had locked it away. And somehow it had returned. Worse still, it wasn't merely back in circulation. It was being displayed before the entire world at the most closely watched royal event of the year. There was no response available to her, no explanation. No version of events that could be turned to her advantage. As the evening continued, Catherine moved through the hall greeting guests. At one point, she walked directly past Camilla and the Parker Bowles family. She didn't nod. She didn't acknowledge them. She didn't even pause. Her gaze passed straight through the space they occupied as though they weren't there at all. For someone who had spent decades exercising influence and demanding recognition, that public indifference was more devastating than any direct confrontation could have been. And the surrounding guests noticed. The expressions directed toward Camilla afterward were anything but sympathetic. The final blow arrived when the orchestra finished its performance. No speech preceded it, no official announcement warned anyone. From the four corners of the hall, royal guards dressed in full ceremonial red uniforms moved forward with quiet precision. They approached members of Camilla's inner network individually. One by one, palace insignia were removed from their lapels. These weren't ordinary decorations. They were symbols of access and authority. And now those privileges were being stripped away in full view of everyone present. The guards then placed firm hands on their shoulders and escorted them across the hall, straight through the main entrance, straight onto the stone steps outside, straight into view of the press photographers waiting beyond the gates. The timing, of course, was no accident. By the next morning, those photographs were destined to be everywhere. The moment they realized what was unfolding, Camilla and members of the Parker Bowles family hurried toward the upper level of the palace, heading directly for the balcony overlooking the public square. That balcony isn't just another part of the building. It's one of the most powerful symbols of royal belonging in the world. Standing there means you're part of the institution, part of the family, part of the image presented to millions. And in that moment, they desperately needed that image. With everything around them falling apart, they needed the public to see them still standing in their place. They reached the entrance, but waiting in front of the doors was a solid line of elite palace guards standing shoulder to shoulder, completely motionless, completely impassible. The commanding officer stepped forward carrying a guest registry. Without saying much, he removed the cap from a red marker and right in front of Camilla, drew a single line through the Parker Bowles name. Then the balcony doors closed. The lock clicked into place with a sharp sound that echoed through the corridor. And that was the end. That was the moment when everything finally collapsed. Every scheme, every threat, every favor, every bribe, every stolen advantage. All of it ended at a locked door and a single red line drawn across a name on a sheet of paper. Outside, the crowd erupted. As Catherine stepped onto the balcony, a wave of cheers rolled across the square below. The noise was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of people filled the space beneath her, creating the kind of reception powerful enough to make the surrounding walls vibrate. Catherine stood beneath the evening light wearing the tiara and looking out across the crowd. There was no uncertainty in her posture, no visible relief, no need to celebrate, just a queen standing exactly where she belonged. Meanwhile, below the balcony level, security personnel escorted Camilla and the Parker Bowles family through the palace corridors and toward the main gates. Their personal belongings followed behind them in suitcases. Once outside, those suitcases were placed on the pavement. Then the massive iron gates of Buckingham Palace closed behind them. For good, Catherine never stopped to watch. She turned away and walked back through the long palace corridors alone. And somehow that silence carried more weight than any speech could have. By that point, she had recovered the tiara. She had shut down the media operation. She had reclaimed the diverted funding. She had documented the entire conspiracy. And she had dismantled the network built to undermine her, all without making a single public accusation. Every move had happened quietly, and every result had landed with devastating force. What this entire episode revealed was something the royal family rarely shows the world. Real power inside that institution isn't determined by titles. It isn't determined by rank. And it certainly isn't determined by how many years someone has spent near the throne. It's determined by loyalty, by precision, and by knowing exactly when to act. Camilla spent decades close to the crown and used that proximity as a way to reach for even more influence. Catherine relied on something different: patience, clarity, and the right people standing beside her. That combination proved impossible to challenge. As for the Parker Bowles chapter, that story appears finished. But anyone familiar with these kinds of power struggles understands that figures like Camilla rarely disappear entirely. They regroup, they search for opportunities, they look for another opening. Whether she still possesses information, connections, or leverage hidden away remains unanswered. That question is still open. What is no longer open is the question of who holds the power. By the end of that banquet, Catherine walked away wearing the crown in every sense of the word, and the people who had tried to take that position from her were left standing outside the palace gates, looking at doors they would never pass through again.